and more about the things paratransit agencies really need to consider before venturing into something like intermodal trip planning. And then we'll finish with a business case for ITP, an environment that we have put ITP live, and the benefits they have seen so far. So without delaying, I'll get on a soapbox here a little bit from a paratransit perspective. I mean, I feel passionately about this, but in paratransit world, this is the spectrum which we all operate in, or at least from a solutions provider perspective, this is how we as StrataGen try to summarize why we exist. In paratransit, much like in the rest of the transit universe, our world is all about customer service and how we deliver it. And, you know, this is open to argument, but, you know, I'll just state it that way. But the additional challenge here is, though, how we can deliver a service that can cost anywhere from $25 to $65, depending on where you are geographically and the density of the area that you're in, when you can only charge about anywhere from, you know, $2 to $5 for it. It is within that in mind we at StrataGen think about optimizing as much as we can in advance, optimize the demand, I mean. So the day before your day of service happens, we do the scheduling, we do the re-optimizing, we do the site tuning to make sure your fleet configuration fits the service that you want to provide. Well, then the day starts. And that perfect schedule you created, we helped you create the night before is suddenly degrading like nobody's business. And to remedy that, you're dispatching, you're doing the rolling re-optimization so that you can make up for the slack caused by cancellations, no-shows, vehicle issues, et cetera, et cetera. And then after all said and done, you do your reporting, your business analysis so that you can continuously improve your operations. But you know, we don't stop there, right? We continue introducing new functions such as web bookers so people can schedule, view, cancel trips online, or integrated voice response systems so your riders can get the information they need without waiting on the line or distracting your call takers who should maybe attend to scheduling trips, or so that you can actually call your riders ahead to let them know that their ride is on their way, so they don't wait for the vehicle up in their apartment or in their house before they actually get out. Then we introduce electronic payment gateways to authenticate and authorize riders to avoid fraud or fare evasion. We do in-vehicle MDTs. So there's a lot of things you do or we do, we help you do to drive operational costs down to increase those efficiencies. But ultimately, the reality is the challenge remains because as your demand increases or if it doesn't increase, then it's staying pretty much the same. Your budgets are being pressed down, but your costs are increasing. It could be the fuel costs, whatever have you, the vehicle maintenance. Still, the challenge remains is what I mean with that. And you know, even if in your particular area, if your demand for a ride is not increasing, it is a fact that based on the Department of Labor and Statistics is that 10 to 12% of U.S. population is disabled, and about 12 to 15% of the population is over 65, and those percentages are increasing at a faster pace now, especially now that the baby boomers are nearing the threshold on the age side. So what else can we do? We can do a number of things. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do still, and we've been thinking about it a lot. You can, this is, what you see on the screen is the spectrum that we kind of outline our thoughts once in a while. So, you know, this is not something that's sanctioned by FTA or anything. This is just our way of outlining our thoughts. But eligibility, we think that there's a lot to do with it. We can do a lot with the eligibility. I mean, paratransit agencies can review eligibility criteria a little bit more closely. There was a study that was done, I believe, last year. John, our marketing manager, the one who started the meeting, he found out this study. I believe it's called Impact of something or another. I have it somewhere here. Let me see. I put it there. Oh, Impact of more rigorous ADA paratransit eligibility assessment on riders with disabilities. It's a National Center for Transit Research in conjunction with the University of Florida. They found out that 51% of paratransit agencies have not reviewed their eligibility criteria since 2005. And a good chunk of the paratransit agencies, I believe the number is 40 or 45, I can't remember, John, correct me if you know, but I believe that a lot of the agencies are using self-eligibility, meaning you have a page somewhere that you as the rider can qualify yourself, and there'll be a remedial review, and that will qualify you for a paratransit ride. So I'm not sure if that's the best way of going about it. In terms of, that was initial transit research. So in terms of service demand, there's lots of things agencies can do. There's price differentials. A lot of agencies are now pricing their services a little differently. If it's not a necessity trip, then they can do some premium pricing. We see that in play in one of our current customers up in Northeast. And then some agencies are looking into ITP offloads. What I mean by that is being able to upload trips either to the fixed route network so that they can leverage what's already there, or have a combination of feeder, which means some portion of the trip is essentially paratransit. And then there's the customer contact. The customer contact goes back to what we were just talking about, having the web or the IVR, or having access to KPIs that really, having access to KPIs from a rider's perspective so they can understand and appreciate your services. And service provisioning here means, benchmarking your providers if you have a fleet that's assisting you beyond your immediate fleet. Looking into demand pattern analysis, mix of fixed versus flex capacity for your vehicle fleet. And then in terms of revenue collection, that's again goes back to being able to do payment integration, verification, et cetera, et cetera. So how does that fit? Where does ITP fit in that spectrum? I certainly believe that ITP can really assist with the first three that we were just looking at. We'll go look at it again, but the eligibility, service demand, and customer contact. But before we go on that tangent, let's talk about ITP. I think ITP, intermodal trip planning, is essentially the ability to create a trip that has potentially multiple modes of transportation associated with it. Like we were talking, this is not a new concept. It's been around forever, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're just having people take buses. It could be any fixed route alternative that has a set schedule, so you can actually assist people with where they need to go, how they need to take the service, and where they need to transfer those kinds of things. And for paratransit operations specifically, it is all about prioritizing those riders who are qualified for specific services higher. This goes back to the self-assessment, et cetera, the self-eligibility process. Today, you may agree with this, you may not agree with this, but essentially there are a lot of agencies that are doing above and beyond what ADA is requiring those agencies to do. Is there anything wrong with that? Absolutely not. If you have the resources, if you have the means, by any means, we need to do that because these are our mothers and fathers, right? However, a lot of abuse comes with when agencies have best intentions. So essentially, the purpose of ITP is to make sure that we're not telling grandma that we've been giving paratransit rides for the last 20 years to go take the bus. It is more about making sure the person we're giving the service is deserving of that service. And if you're really interested in expanding your service beyond the ADA requirements, that by all means, if you have the resources, do it. But if you are being scrunched by those resources, then you need to find either ways of increasing your efficiency beyond what you already have, or supplementing that initiative with a new layer of service where you can introduce intermodal trip planning as a viable alternative. It's not going to replace all of your services. It's not going to be all the results to all of your problems, but it will definitely help. And it is all about aligning closely through ADA requirements. It is about servicing growing demand with existing resources, and it's certainly, for some, can be about reducing costs, or as one of our customers put it very nicely, it is about cost avoidance. Like I was saying just now, the way we see ITP fitting is the first three buckets that we were just talking about: eligibility, service demand, and customer contact. So let's apply eligibility. So first of all, you really need to revisit your eligibility guidelines. Like I was saying, that study mentioned that 51% of the agencies failed to revisit eligibility considerations since 2005. Are your eligibility criteria granular enough to qualify people for ITP? Do you know how far your riders can walk and how fast? Are there restrictions about taking certain steps up or down? How frequently are you holding recertification so that you are on top of the eligibility requirement and you can constantly review and weed out some of the conditional eligible riders that kind of made it through the system despite the fact that their eligibility is expired? I'll just give you an example. One of our customers near St. Louis found out that a rider is no longer eligible, no longer conditionally eligible, not because they recertified, but because they saw him running after the paratransit vehicle after dispatch deemed the trip as no-show and instructed the driver to leave. In this particular case, this person had been conditionally qualified due to a broken leg for 6 months, 5 years before the incident, and has been taking paratransit rides ever since. Maybe that's an edge case, maybe that's abusive to the extreme, but there are users like that. So anyway, you really need to look at your eligibility carefully before you consider something like ITP, because what you don't want to do is what I was saying, tell grandma to take the bus after giving her service on paratransit for 20 years. You can do these qualifications within the ADA requirements, so you're not essentially cheating around the ADA or anything. In the case of New York City Transit, the customer that we're going to talk about when we talk about the business case today, the way they've done it is that if a rider is in a wheelchair or has equipment for oxygen tank, etc., or physically disabled otherwise, or simply cannot walk more than up to 2 city blocks, then the rider will always get paratransit service. So that person is not eligible conditionally or otherwise for intermodal trip planning. But others who can walk more than 2 city blocks, they will be eligible for paratransit, but only if those conditions apply. In the case of New York City, what are those conditions? Weather is one of them. If it's too cold, if it's below a certain degree, or if it's above a certain degree in the summer, then those riders, even they're physically okay to take an intermodal trip, they will be given paratransit rides. From a service demand perspective, there needs to be careful consideration for max ride time. Riders being eligible for a fixed route alternative or feeder trip does not relieve you as the paratransit agency of your service duties, service commitments. So can you really maintain the max ride times while maintaining acceptable level of inconvenience to your riders? And in terms of customer contact, in this particular case, what I'm talking about is the political and social will plus change management. Just because your costs are rising or your demand is increasing and you're having some budgetary issues doesn't mean you can get away with simply adding a new service layer or adding like a cost-cutting measure such as ITP or cost avoidance measure like ITP. And the reason is there needs to be political and social will. You need to make sure that you have visibility to your operations enough that people will understand, and they may not like it, but they will relate and accept the proposition that you're making some changes for some of the ridership. And the change management is very critical too. You really need to let your riders know in advance. You really need to do it in small batches. When you're launching the service, I think it would be smart to start small so that you can manage the impact, the backlash, feedback, etc., a little bit more effectively if there are such concerns. So without any further delay, I want to jump into the business case. And as we talk through the business case, we'll actually start talking about how New York City implemented it and how they had the sound approach by starting small and expanding the functionality as they went. So I thought that was one of the better ways of implementing a solution in the long run. So New York City Transit. New York City Transit is the largest agency, and yes, the dollar figures and the dollar figures are going to be above and beyond what some of the smaller agencies can relate to. But from an operational perspective, historically, or at least I've observed that when New York City experiences an initiative or has an issue, that usually manifests itself for the rest of the paratransit agencies within a few years' time. So it's just a matter of time. We believe that intermodal trip planning is going to start becoming an initiative. And in fact, we do have in our customer base agencies that have been inquiring about intermodal trip planning and agencies that are interested in implementing it in the near future. So let's get back to New York City Transit. So in New York City Transit, the paratransit division of MTA, the cost structure is rather impressive. 88% of their $500 million plus budget are used for contracted provider services. So what that means is the cost of the trips, cost of providing those trips, the fleet, the management of those fleets, etc., are amounting up to 88% of that budget. The rest of the budget goes to maintaining the call center operations, the scheduling, the vehicle purchases, and the eligibility administration. So as you can see, New York is spending quite some funds into the cost structure. So by the way, a little bit of background here. New York has seen its ridership grow on an average of 18 to 20% since 1994. There were a couple of really good presentations, eye-opening presentations, in my opinion, in 2010, 2011, that show the progression of how trips went from less than a million to over 8 million in 2011 in a short amount of time. I mean, in less than 20 years. That equates to about almost 20% growth year over year. And when you have those kinds of increases, there's not enough budget in the world to keep up with it. And in fact, in 2010, MTA, as you probably all know, has implemented a fairly strict cost-cutting measure, asking its divisions to dramatically reduce costs in the vicinity of 10 to 15%. And as a result, New York City Transit had to fall in line and find some cost reduction opportunities, and they pursued quite a few of them, and ITP was a fairly critical component of those. So what were these initiatives? The first initiative that they wanted to pursue was reducing total trips provided. And according to plan, they wanted to save about $11 million from this initiative in 2010 and another 34 in 2011. These were projected gains. And essentially those roughly translated into 230,000 trips reduced in 2010 and about 800,000 or so in 2011. And how were they going to do it? The idea was to be able to upload some of the trips to fixed full routes, meaning instead of a paratransit ride, the caller gets a full fixed route, meaning they can take the public transportation to their destination based on their eligibilities. Another effort to support this initiative was stricter eligibility and recertification, as well as improvements to the no-show and cancellation policies and enforcing the three-quarter-mile rule. The second initiative was around converting contracted trips to fixed route feeder trips. Like I mentioned, the feeder trip, a fixed route feeder trip, is a trip where the first segment of the trip is accomplished by paratransit, and then the rider is taken to a bus stop or whatever the fixed route essentially medium is, and then the rider completes the trip on the fixed route network the rest of the trip. And this was again a fairly small fairly small initiative in 2010. The cost savings, the expected cost savings were around $700,000 in 2010 and about 35 in 2011. And just so that it's clear, New York City Transit implemented ITP, at least the first phase of it, in 2010. So the expectation from some of the ITP benefits in 2010 were rather low. And I'll explain the timeline and how they've done it in a minute. So in terms of reducing the average cost per trip, what that initiative entailed was being able to better manage some of the taxi voucher and brokerage initiatives, eliminating the costlier carriers, and dwelling in some shared ride optimization. And those initiatives were fairly expected to deliver fairly high return in the amounts in the vicinity of around 17 million in 2010 and another 40 in 2011. The last one, the reduction of non-service related costs, were around cost-cutting measures around managing non-service related costs. I guess that's the name of the initiative too, but such as managing the load and unload times, etc. And those were smaller returns, around 3.5 million in 2010, another 5 in 2011. So these numbers are huge, especially if you're a smaller agency. It doesn't necessarily mean these do not relate to you, in the sense that it may be in a smaller scale, but these are some cost-cutting initiatives that can benefit any paratransit agency. It's just about having the social input to be able to undertake them. And in terms of ITP, ITP squarely helped New York City Transit, in my opinion, to help reduce costs in the first three initiatives: reducing total trips provided, converting contracted trips to fixed route feeder trips, and reducing the average cost per trip. The last one may be a little bit more in a roundabout way, but definitely in the first two. So how did they do it? They did it in a very intelligent way. They started small. The first thing that we worked with them was the conditional eligibility process. They've done New York has a great eligibility process anyway, but what they've done is they've taken it to the next step, and like our neighbors here at Pierce Transit, they do conditional eligibility as well. They've really looked at the customer base, the rider base, and qualified them, recertified them as necessary to make sure that those who are qualified to travel on the fixed route network can indeed get fixed route networks schedules as needed, itineraries as needed. And then in the initial onset, in the last quarter of 2010, what we did was we just enabled riders to take the fixed route only. So when callers called in, if they were conditionally eligible and all the conditions were met, then the rider got either a paratransit ride or a fixed route ride. And the customer can accept or reject. And New York City did a great job of setting expectations by sending communications ahead of time, but then also starting the release of the functionality very slow. So they started with a small universe to make sure that all the kinks are worked out, and there was acceptance and not backlash. And there wasn't. I think we as the vendor, we expected backlash, but I think there were 2 minor articles on the web somewhere, but no major blowouts as a result. And then they dialed the conditions up and the population up, so there would be more fixed route trips that were recommended. The next step was early 2011. They introduced the feeder portion of the solution, which means some users got paratransit for the first part of the trip, first part of the itinerary. They were taken to a bus stop, and then they were then completing the rest of the trip on the bus. And they've done a great job on that one too. They started small and they expanded. And in the process, what they found out was the fact that users who got fixed route on a regular basis, they stopped calling. That was an interesting one, and the reason is because I think that was an unexpected benefit. They saw a decrease in number of calls that were coming in. There were a number of the growth in ridership was not growing exponentially. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I'm looking at my notes here, New York City Transit actually observed only a 6% increase in ridership in 2010, 14% below expectations, and nearly 8% increase in 2011, as opposed to the typical 16 to 18% annual average growth rate that the division has observed since 1994. Anyway, so in 2011, going into 2012, one of the things we worked with New York City Transit was also introducing not just bus but also ferries into the system. We've done the work, so I mean, since ferries have schedule and there's, they're just like essentially a fixed route network, they easily fit nicely into the feeder. And then, in the future, they may consider subways and additional lines. However, in the case of ferries, the New York City decided not to put it into production, and the reason is there might be some challenges for some of the users. Even if they're capable, physically capable, there might be some uneven gaps, etc., in the ferry terminal station that really held them back on that initiative. But the reason I bring that up is the fact that ITP, intermodal trip planning, is not about just buses. It can be any network that has a fixed route component. So the next set of cost-cutting measures that New York is going to undertake is brokerage, being able to broker trips to brokers, and significantly reduce costs from an operational perspective, and then also introduce the reverse feeder concept, where users can take a fixed route to a central hub, and then they could be then shuttled, essentially, if that's a word to use appropriately, to their final destination, the last mile or two of the trip, so that it can be an effectively hub and shuttle model. So the thing I wanted to, what was the thing I wanted to mention? The thing I wanted to mention is it's critical when you're doing these kinds of initiatives to embed the information, the proposed trip itinerary into your scheduling system. And the reason is, what you don't want to do is have an argument with the person who's calling and getting a fixed route or a feeder trip and argue as to why they got that. So it was critical that we embed this into the scheduling environment that they're using, Adapt, and that way it's seamless to the call takers, but it's also seamless to the dispatch operations as well. The reason I bring that up is the fact that there are ITP solutions out there that we've seen from various players in the market, but they only allow you to look up an address from and to without really regard for the customer. It's not an independent review of the situation. It's not a conditional review of the situation. It's an either-or proposition, and I don't think that applies in a service-sensitive environment such as this one. And the last few things I wanted to do before we get into the questions, really, and if you do have any questions, I wanted to show you this particular graph. It's the simulated outcome of daily trips. This is the projected trips from New York City Transit, again from a presentation early in 2011. In the future, the way they see it happening was that they expected 74% of their trips still to remain in paratransit. Like I was saying before, this is not the solution to all of your problems. This is essentially a way of cost avoidance. This is a way of getting you closer to ADA requirements. But then they expected 20% of trips to eventually go to feeder trips, and a small percentage to go to a full fixed route, because there's such an extensive bus network in New York that can carry that. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is how it looks in the client operations screen for those that are using Adapt. Essentially, what happens? This is the call workflow. When the phone rings, the call taker answers the phone. They search for the client based on the information, using any of the fields, the Social Security, last name, etc., whatever have you. And then once that user pops up, they can click New Trip. And when they do that, they see a notification saying this user is conditionally eligible. That sets the CSR for an ITP, or at least an expectation of what kind of trips this user may get. And then once the trip is clicked to be scheduled, if there is an ITP evaluation, then the CSR will see this particular screen. And in this screen, as you can see, there's the origination address, destination address, and then and instructions as to how the user can walk to a certain place and take the bus. And you can instruct your CSRs, the customer service reps, to give as much or as little information as they need. But the ultimate value here is that this trip can be completed just on the bus by taking the bus M15 at 7:09 from a certain bus stop. And here at the bottom of the screen you see accept or refuse or override. Those are essentially buttons that appear if you have certain permissions. If you are a supervisor, then you will see the override, where you can simply, for whatever reason, maybe the person is not feeling well that day, and if you're okay with that, then you can override and give them a paratransit ride. But most of the time, the customer service reps will only see refuse and accept, and if they refuse, then it's not a denial. It is just that the customer has not accepted this particular trip that you have offered them. Another example of that is a bus and a bus where you may actually tell the user to transfer. The fact that you may offer a transfer is up to you. You don't necessarily have to. We've done a lot of thinking around it. There's lots of considerations. The maximum ride time, you can't just tell people to take 6 different buses to get to their destination. You have legally binding maximum ride times in some of the geographic areas that you work with. But it is a possibility. I just wanted to show you that. The other thing I wanted to show you was the fact that there's a feeder service, like in this particular example, where you see the first trip has that disabled sign that represents paratransit, and then the user will be asked to travel on the bus, and then they'll do a very short walk to their final destination. And if you want to get really fancy, then you can take a look at this one, where the user will be picked up at their destination, the origination destination, by a paratransit service. They will be taken to a ferry terminal, which they will take it across the water, and then they will take the bus to their final destination. Like I said, this is not, this portion is from our test environment. It is not in production in New York. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about ITP. I know that I completely rushed through some of the things. I just wanted to give you a taste of the concept that is ITP, the reasons why it fits nicely into our paratransit paradigm and considerations and daily concerns that we have as a solutions vendor. And I also wanted to see how an agency can benefit from this. And New York is always a good example because they have the scale, they have some of the impressive numbers. So either in percentage form or in full dollar or rider count, those numbers always kind of impress. But it's also a distraction because when you don't have that many numbers, you're like, okay, well, I don't have 8 trips a year. Well, does that apply to me? Well, it actually does. So anyway, I brushed over a lot of concepts here. However, I'd rather keep it organic, so I'll shut up now, and then I'll let you guys chime in. So, okay, and Brian Alscher from New York City Transit, who's on the online, he actually supported my statement that they're not using the ferry at this time, but the functionality does work. Thank you for the what do you call that? What? Not the correction, but it's an approval. Yes, it does work. So, and it really works. Either they and he was saying that the riders have either stopped calling or they have asked for eligibility assessment, which I think again drives the point home, is the fact that those who may be thinking that they should be eligible now, they can ask for a eligibility reassessment. So I'm looking at John for other questions. How do you factor, one question, I don't know who it's from, but how do you level, what? Eileen Sierra. Question from Eileen is, how do you factor level of mobility to determine that they can do walking portion of the trip? That's a very good question, and I think it ties nicely back to our eligibility discussion, and I know that I got on the soapbox in terms of eligibility, but in the eligibility centers, that's where the walking portion needs to be assessed. And from a solution perspective, the more granular you are, the more effective your solution is going to be, so that it would be appropriate to assess them in a way you can qualify either in blocks or a particular distance in feet, so that we can tell the system, hey, this person can walk only 2 blocks or 300 feet. So when the scheduling is being calculated, if the bus stop is further away than 300 feet, they either qualify for feeder or a full paratransit trip. Another question from Ruben. Hey Ruben, an existing customer. Will the PowerPoint presentation will be posted on StrataGen forum? Thank you for plugging in the StrataGen forum. Yes, the presentation will indeed be posted on the StrataGen forum. In fact, we'll do one better. We'll not only put the presentation up there, but we've actually recorded this presentation, I believe, and we're going to be able to trim it so that if I get on a soapbox too much, we'll just probably cut it out. But we'll be able to post it on our StrataGen blog, and participants of this conference will receive an email link, a follow-up link to the presentation, so they can forward it to those who couldn't receive it. Any other questions? All right, well, you're seeing my numbers and my coordinates on the screen, so feel free to email or call me with any questions. And if you can think of other questions, go ahead and email me or email the marketing at StrataGen.com. I believe that's the email that the email address that the invitations have come out of. And we'll answer your questions. And in fact, if there are some questions, we'll probably post them in the on our StrataGen blog where the presentation is, so that all of you can become aware of other questions, the questions that we received. All right, well, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to talking to you in another webinar in a month's time. Have a great day.